All right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So, hey, today we are still in our temporary studio. A couple more days. We've got them hard at work, putting things together, furniture deliveries and all that. But today my guest is Tyler O'Neill, and he sent me this book, The Woke-topus. I'm excited to talk to him because the timing could not be better. We are dealing right now with what's happening with USAID and Doge and all of that stuff. And so I have a feeling that he's going to have some thoughts on that. Tyler, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Bryce.
Yeah, no, I am glad to have you on. It's perfect. It's perfect timing because we really are seeing some really fast and rapid changes right now in government. The left doesn't know what to do because it's moving so fast, and the meltdown is crazy online. I don't know how much you're paying attention to that, but it is fun to behold. Everybody's like, "We didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for this," and I'm saying, "Yes, we did." So, so what are your initial thoughts as all this news is coming out before we get into the book?
Yeah, no, I mean it's been fantastic to watch. I like to say it's morning in America, but half of America wants to pull the blackout curtain back down. So what you saw, the big protest. It's funny. In 2017, you had this big, not my president. All these, the mob came out against President Trump. This year, it's largely been crickets. And then finally, when you actually see a protest, it's a whole bunch of disgruntled government employees who are like, no, we don't want to get fired. And it's like, yeah, well, there's a reason why the American people voted for change this past election. And it has a lot to do with what you've been doing with our government in our name for so long.
Yeah, no, it's really wild because you're seeing the bureaucracy and that entire class just apoplectic, right? He can't do this. I mean, the funny thing about USAID is that they were created by executive order, so that is one of the departments that can also be shut down by executive order, and it does
Funny
not
how that works.
Yeah, it does not require congressional approval. The other interesting one on that is the FBI, and they know it too. The FBI was created via executive order and can't be disbanded via executive order. So for all of their protests and all of these permanent bureaucrats losing their jobs, I mean it really truly is glorious. It's like the sacking of the republic is over, and you're seeing the snake freak out.
Yeah, well, when you talk about snakes, I mean, it's interesting. We've one of my someone who came to one of my events recently was saying, public sector unions, they really turn public servants into public serpents because suddenly their goal is to make the most out of the trust that the American people have given them. And it's like, no, your goal is to serve the American people. And when the American people don't want a bloated government that is often unaccountable to the people's elected representatives, be that the man behind the resolute desk or the people in Congress, you need, the deep state should not exist. And yet we see it constantly coming up. I mean, we even saw a deep state effort against Biden's administration on the issue of Israel. And so a lot of these bureaucrats, they take their position for granted and they say, look, I'm the one in control. I should be the one determining policy. And it's like, no, you're a delegate of the people's elected president.
That's right.
Allowed by Congress, whether that was wise or not when they created the administrative state, we'll leave that for others to decide. I think there's a lot of trimming that has to happen. But it just so happens that the president agrees with me on that front.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that we don't want, transgender parties in Peru. I mean, they were funding, and I love some of the highlights because it's some of the most absurd things on top of being some of the most destructive things or ideologically oriented. I mean, we're not talking about them, feeding hungry mouths with all of these things. And yes, there was some of that. You could point to maybe some good things that were happening, but by and large, I mean, we're talking about psyops on the world stage. We're talking about things that have been destructive to the ideology of more than half the country. I mean, things that are in many cases outright evil. So we're I mean, look, when I saw some of the numbers that they've been spending on these NGOs to resettle throughout our country, all of the undocumented and illegal immigrants that are coming in, I mean, we were on the doorstep of actual communism taking over in this country, and they were using these churches and these Catholic organizations and these Episcopal organizations to seed throughout the U.S. a permanent voting bloc that they would use to reshape America forever. And so to see how close we were to that, and to see how much money was being spent, I mean, just a couple of them I saw were nearly $1 billion alone.
Yeah.
So it's wild. So I'm excited. I want to get into this book, but please give us the background, give us a little bit of information on the Daily Signal for those who are unfamiliar, how you came to write this book, give us a little bit of flavor there.
Yeah. So the Daily Signal was established by the Heritage Foundation. We're in America's, we're in Washington, but we're not of it. We like to say we're America's outpost in Washington, keeping an eye on things. I affectionately refer to Washington, D.C. as Mordor. So it's the city I affectionately refer to as Mordor, because I find it fascinating. I find everything going on to be, it's the greatest show on earth. And yet there's so much corruption, and there's a reason why they call it the swamp. And so you have to be on edge. You have to follow things. You have to follow the money. You have to see where the influence is going. And that's a lot of where. So I had been following this group called the Southern Poverty Law Center for forever.
Oh, yeah.
And they are the worst of the worst. They have a map of KKK chapters. So they're famous for suing Klan groups into bankruptcy in the 1980s. And then they decided, we're going to monitor the Klan, right? Pretty good thing to do, right? And then they started putting more and more mainstream conservative groups on this hate map with Klan chapters. And so now you have organizations like the Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom, even Moms for Liberty on this map with chapters of the Klan, suggesting that conservatives represent a domestic terror threat to other Americans. And and behold, Biden cites it. Yeah, Bryce.
Yeah. Sorry. I think all three of the boards that I sit on in the conservative world, Turning Point, PragerU, I think all of them are on that list. So it's funny to watch. I mean, look, so much of this stuff is activists. If they solve a problem, they don't get paid any longer. And, the KKK and, some of those outright, racist groups, and, we're from a bygone era. So, they had to stay relevant, and the Biden administration helped, and others by, painting anyone who is not in favor of the grift that they've got going on in DC as domestic terrorists, when the truth is we're just we the people, and that's who they're acting against. Madison Cawthorn, by the way, and I think I always get a crack up on it, Congressman Cawthorn calls it the District of Criminals, and you feel it when you're there. Has the temperature changed? I mean, what does it feel like now that there's out and out panic in the streets by some of these people?
Well, it's like the calm before the storm, I think, in a lot of ways, because we're seeing Trump come out very aggressively with all these orders, with everything he's been doing, and it has exceeded my expectations. I was hoping
I've never seen anything like it.
But from one thing to another. So like declaring that there are two biological sexes, like who would have thought you'd have to do that? But he did, and he said it straightforward, and it was like all U.S. policy will follow this. And by the way, that means a lot of foreign funding has to be reconsidered, because like you said, they were promoting transgender plays and operas in places. I'm just like, you can't come up with this stuff if you wanted to as a satire. Like the Babylon Bee would have predicted half of it. And yet that's where we were as a country. And so Trump comes in, he gets rid of that. He gets rid of one thing after another. He starts these, I love it. He's saying Mexico, Canada, you need to work with us on fighting our border crisis because it's a national crisis. It's causing a lot of problems, especially for America, but for their countries too. And it's like they should be. It is in their interest to crack down on some of this crime. And yet he has to threaten tariffs. Of course, before the tariffs come into effect, both Mexico and Canada are back at the table offering to help with the problem. And so everybody, all the established, the establishment in the US is like, these tariffs are going to be the end of the world. They're going to drive up prices. They're going to ruin everything. Meanwhile, Trump is sitting there saying like, I know how to make a deal. This is an opening gambit. We're not going to be slapping 50% tariffs on Mexico and Canada forever. They're terrified of this, rightly so. And so they're going to come to the table and we're going to work something out. That's the way that Trump operates. And those of us who know, we see the one thing and we see the freak out and we almost enjoy seeing the freak out because as soon as the truth comes to light, suddenly it's like, it really is morning in America. But I think we are ready, we have to be ready for the other shoe to drop. A lot of these activist groups that were calling the shots in the Biden administration are waiting in the wings. And some of them are already getting involved, responding to the Trump administration's positive steps in the right direction. So we've seen the ACLU start to file lawsuits. We've seen the Southern Poverty Law Center say that they're about to file lawsuits. And everybody, they like to say, oh, what Trump is doing is violating civil rights law. They're violating the law. But lo and behold, when you actually get a lawsuit, most of the time the courts are not going to take this seriously because they're not really based on much. And if they are a serious lawsuit at all, like we just had the funding freeze, which, I don't think that was I think the president was well within his rights to make that freeze. The judge was being a little bit activist-y, in my opinion, slapping it down. But now they're just saying, look, we're going to have a better policy. We're preparing a better order to actually implement this, but we're still sticking with it. We are getting rid of the DEI funding, the transgender funding. It's like in the book, I define woke as 4 different things. One of them is critical race theory, gender ideology, the promotion of transgender insanity, climate alarmism, and a preference for technocratic government. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic, if nothing else, had really zeroed in and shown Americans that there have been abuses on all of these ideological levels and that the American people are fed up and they don't want it anymore.
That's right. Yeah, no, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing it change rapidly, with what he's doing. That it's funny because the left has a tactic, and it's a game. And we played it in the correct way when we said what is a woman, but they want to say define woke. Everybody knows what it is because we've been seeing it as the predominant religious ideology of the day. And everybody knows what it means. You can just say, oh, I'm woke, and we know what you believe, and we know what it is that what altar you worship at. And so, of course, it's amusing to watch them try to play the game unsuccessfully back at us because we actually have established definitions of things. We're not afraid of the truth. We're not afraid of actual dictionaries and everything else. We're not afraid also to discuss our ideologies open and what we believe openly. They will never, I try harder than anything else to get people to come on to this show that disagree or have those beliefs or share the beliefs that are on the opposite side of us. And they won't because, of course, they don't want to platform grifters. They don't want to actually have their ideologies examined because they do not stand up to scrutiny. All of this stuff is just efforts to move us towards some kind of global feudalism, using communism as a sales pitch. So so let's talk about the book. Let's get into some of the details because there is this massive amount of money and effort that has been put into destabilizing us for decades. I'd love you to kind of tell us what you discovered as you started to peel back all of this stuff.
Yeah. So the reason I mentioned the Southern Poverty Law Center is because I was astounded to see the sort of influence that they had in the Biden White House, in the Biden administration, talking to the DOE, talking to the DOJ, being brought in as an expert on domestic terrorism when the SPLC's own hate map had inspired an act of domestic terrorism in 2012. So this really led me to start asking questions, and I did some research, and I realized if you scratch beneath the surface on any particular Biden policy, you'll see the woke activist group standing in the wings, demanding either that exact policy or something like it, or in some cases, there's this organization called Demos. And demos, it's the root for democracy, so it's the ancient Greek word for people. This organization, one of its founding board members, was a little-known Illinois state senator by the name of Barack Obama. And Demos had insane access in the Biden administration. You had two Demos staffers going into high-level places. I think one of them was in OIRA, which, if you know anything about the Byzantine way that our administrative state is organized, OIRA is one of the main agencies that determines how the other agencies work. It's part, I believe, of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Anyway, it's all a complex Byzantine system. But Demos fed two staffers up really high in the administration, and then they wrote a memo. They said, this is what the president should sign as an executive order. That executive order, Biden essentially copied it, pasted it, put his name on it, and signed it. And then not only did he sign effectively their executive order, but he brought Demos in to advise the administration on exactly how to implement the order. So it's like the level of access, it's almost as though Demos became an agency in the federal government for purposes of filling this out. And one of the things that happened with this order was there was this crazy meeting. And, I go through, I do all this research, and I find all these different groups that are influencing the Biden administration. And then I come across this meeting, and I'm like, well, this just proves my entire point in spades, because it's all the woke groups that think that voter suppression is the real threat to our elections. And voter suppression hasn't been a threat for decades, mainly because we have civil rights laws that protect the right to vote. And it is the idea that people who, especially people who are black, can't vote because they can't get driver's licenses. It is the most racist, insane thing I've ever heard. And yet the left continues to bring this out. Anyway, all these groups that oppose voter ID and oppose election integrity all came together. And it was like, it was Open Society Policy Center. It was the Southern Poverty Law Center. It was all these places that really don't have any business advising the federal government on election law. And yet they're all there. And if you look through the list, every single person at that meeting was a Democrat except one. And that one person was too far to the left for the Democrats. They were a Green Party member. And so, this is the Biden administration.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, mentioning that ID thing, I mean, the whole entire purpose there is not to, to help disenfranchise potential voters and things like that. It's because if we lock it down and we require IDs and we require a really clear, transparent system, and we require it to all be counted on the same day and everything that they've done in Florida, they will not win another election probably for the next 30 years. And part of that's because they moved so far to the left. They went so crazy. They, force-fed so many people that are now aware of it. Because for many and you've been in it. I've been in it. I've been talking about this stuff for more than a decade, privately and then publicly for the last 4 or 5 years. I've been following it, for 20 years. I mean, this sort of long march for the institutions and everything that they've done to try to transform America. But they went so far, they overplayed their hands so radically. So many just average people that used to look at me kind of cross-eyed as I talk about deep state or dark money or all those sort of things now are like, oh, we see it and we get it. I mean, they've created a generational problem or two for them. So, good luck. And I'm praying daily that we do fix our election system. And I hope that's the one thing that Trump is able to get done, because if we don't, then all of his good work, over the next 4 years, and maybe JD Vance's over the 8 following that, they'll undo as quickly as they possibly can, and start marching us off to the gulags.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is, and it is really important to say we have to tackle all of these policy issues, because especially when it comes to election integrity, we have to have, and this isn't even like, even if I believed that Democrats would win if we had election integrity, I would still support election integrity, because I think it is fundamentally important that the American people can trust our election system.
Yeah.
That we know whoever wins, and if our preferred guy loses, if our preferred gal or guy loses at the end of the day on election day, if we can trust the system, we can move on, and we can say, like, look, the American people voted the other way. Unfortunately, when you have this massive influence campaign on the left that is trying to prevent election integrity, trying to, like, you have to have an ID, a valid legal ID to buy alcohol in this country. You have to have an ID to drive a car. Why do you not have to have an ID to make the important decision of who runs our government? Why is it so hard to have, and I mean, there's a reason why. If you look at voter ID polling, it's not close. It's like 80+% of the American people understands this very basic issue. And yet you have the left in their NGOs and in their studies and everything, and they claim to know that election integrity is going to make things worse for certain people. And I'm like, I wonder why you think it's going to make things worse. I wonder why you don't want our election system to be secure. That's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you and I know why. And I think the rest of the, people in this country are learning why. But, to your point a moment ago, let's say everything was done really, really well in 2020, and there wasn't any cheating, and there wasn't a significant amount of fraud. Let's say it was pretty good, and Biden won fair and square. Even if we're imagining that, confidence has been lost. And to your point is that we need to clean it up just for that alone, because it destabilized us. I mean, it has destabilized our country. We've lost faith in our country, and until we restore that, every year, every election cycle is going to be, a whole bunch of accusations of cheating and fraud, and we have been in a civil war for a long time. Just hasn't gone kinetic. We continue down that path without restoring confidence in this country. It will get to be a kinetic civil war, and you will see, widespread violence, and we've been moving towards that pretty rapidly.
Well, that's why I really wanted to zoom out in this book and talk about the overall influence, because what we see time and time again is that there are these really big, these elite donors, people like George Soros, who now his son Alex Soros is at the helm of Open Society Foundations, and he's even more political than his dad. Yep. But you have Arabella Advisors, Eric Kessler, these people who are they're founding organizations to funnel money to woke activist groups that can then call the shots in the government, in academia. One of the big shocking ones for me always has been the Human Rights Campaign, which until this year, and until actually earlier last year a little bit, there were some more right-leaning, companies that have more right-leaning consumer bases, funny how it works that way, who decided that they were going to opt out of the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, which for those who don't know is this ESG weapon, where a whole bunch of venture capitalists were saying, oh, we're not going to give money to your company unless the Human Rights Campaign says that it's amazing and very pro-LGBT. And that's why you had Target and Bud Light go absolutely crazy in 2023, falling over themselves to cater to the transgender agenda. Everybody's like, oh yeah, they're only like 0.2% of our population, which is true. But when you have groups like the Human Rights Campaign, which I call the LGBTQ mafia, who are essentially allowed to call the shots in corporate America, suddenly everyone and their mother wants a cut of this activist campaign. And thankfully, Trump has moved the ball so much that even Target is saying they're going to opt out of the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index now, which is fantastic. But that doesn't mean that the Human Rights Campaign ceases to exist. That doesn't mean that George Soros and Alex Soros are deciding they're no longer going to try to influence things. In fact, Alex,
you're right.
Yeah,
they're going to do whatever they can. They'll find some other acronym. They'll find some other way. I mean,
Right.
they are insidious and unstoppable, which, we go about, working in our businesses. There's a lot of people that, for the last several years have been super focused and, hot and heavy on winning on our side. And, we have. And many of these people, because I talk to them all the time, they think we're, all right, it's done. Woo, now we can go and make some money and
No. Yeah.
families and do that. No, I mean, evil never rests, and these people will never ever rest. And I've likened it over the years to the bad guy you hit with the frying pan. They fall on the ground, everybody cheers, hugs, and then the guy's
Right.
rising in the background again to stab them to death. And we have to keep hitting this sucker until it is dead. And it can't resurrect itself for 30 years. And we have that possibility now. I mean, we truly can do this. And I think Trump is doing a fantastic job cutting off the funding. I mean, one thing that impacts, reading this book, I mean, boy, you are a colossal nerd in the greatest way possible. You have assembled
Oh, yes.
so much math in this thing. I mean, it's unbelievable just how many billions and billions of dollars have gone into trying to destroy the United States of America and advance agendas that are the complete antithesis to our founding. I mean, it is unbelievable. Was there anything in here as you start to peel back? I mean, and maybe it was the Southern Poverty Law Center, but were there any of these things that you thought, wow, I didn't realize that, that organization was doing this, or anything that surprised you that maybe we're not hearing every single day?
Yeah. One of the groups that really surprised me, there's this organization called the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And they're not quite a union. It's weird. So there's this big union movement, and this is part of chapter 3 in my book, where Biden said, oh, I'm going to be the best president for unions in American history. And I think there's an important distinction that has to be made. Biden was the best president for the union bosses in American history. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
That's right.
But Trump came in, and Trump represents and resonates with the union workers, the people who don't feel well represented by those particular union bosses. And by the way, those union bosses, these are superstructures that often spend a lot of their money supporting Democrats. So you get a well-intentioned worker, right, who gets hired, and maybe they have to unionize through the National Education Association. Maybe they have to unionize through the AFL-CIO. They're part of this union. They send a portion of their paycheck in the form of union dues to the union every 2 weeks, every bi-monthly, whatever it is. And the union takes that money. The union spends some of that money to support Democratic causes. And it doesn't matter if there are Republican members of the union. There have been cases where a union will spend money to oppose the significant other, the spouse of one of their own union members, because that particular union member is a Republican. But the union doesn't care. That is the story of Janus v. AFSCME, the big Supreme Court case in 2018. Anyway, they also send a lot of their money in the name of in the name of charity to a lot of these woke activist groups that are calling the shots that were calling the shots in the Biden administration, that are now gearing up to oppose the Trump administration and prepare a government in exile. But one of these groups is the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And this group tries to get domestic workers unionized. And their basic idea is that there is no sort of work in the United States that should not be unionized. And so this is the left's idea. This is their preference for technocratic government. That's why I think that is a particular part of the woke definition that needs to be there, because they say unions are always good. And it's mainly because the superstructures of unions support them. But the NDWA was instrumental in getting AB 5 passed in California. And if you know anything about the way a lot of Americans work, a lot of us work as freelancers. A lot of our work, we want to be our own boss in some cases.
That's right.
And a lot of freelancers make more money than normal employees. So it's not like everybody is an Uber or Lyft driver who also makes a good amount of money usually, but it's not like everybody who's a freelancer is just struggling to get by. There are a lot of people who this is a very good path for them, and this is a big part of America's industrial economy, a lot of our workers. Anyway, California says if you want to be an independent contractor, you can't. Why can't you? Because you'd be misclassified. And if you scratch beneath the surface, why do they care about classification? It's so that they can empower unions, so that as many people as possible can be in traditional employee relationships so they can unionize. And so they pushed this in California. Under Biden, they pushed it at the national level too. The Department of Labor had a rule that came into effect, and I don't know how much damage it's already done to our economy, but it has a lot of potential to ruin things. And this essentially is saying you can't be an independent contractor. These are the policies that this woke superstructure, that people like George and Alex Soros, Open Society Foundations, Arabella Advisors, they want to force on the American people. And that's the woke agenda, and it has to be combated. We can't sit back. We can't say, oh, Trump won. That's the end of the matter. Trump is fighting the deep state, and Trump has a lot of work cut out for him. And I have great faith. These 2 weeks have made me over the moon in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean I don't look at the future and say, oh, it's plain sailing, because it's not. We're already seeing these same woke groups gear up to fight the administration. I have a running tally that I've published on my Substack that I'll keep updating, and I'm sure it's going to get super, super, super long. It's already at 8 or 9 actions right now, but it's going to keep going because these people don't give up, and we can't afford to. Yeah,
well, you're doing a great job exposing it. We need more of this. We need people to identify it. If you just think about the common thread that they have, the common theme is about centralizing power. That's what unions are about. That's what everything that George Soros and Alex and the World Economic Forum, everything that they're doing is to centralize power. It's a globalism 2.0. They want us to be slaves. They want us to be serfs. If you understand that that is their aim, and they'll do whatever it takes, including lying to you that it's about a virus and your safety and everything else, they will do everything to make that possible. And the only way we can combat it is by exposing it and, ripping it out and starving them of their money, because George Soros cannot fund it all. These woke billionaires cannot fund it all. They use our tax dollars to do it. They use countless NGOs, countless omnibus bills and everything like that. And what I'm hoping is guys like you continue to expose it. Elon Musk and Doge and President Trump and RFK and Tulsi and Pete Hegseth and Scott Duffy and all of these folks start ripping it out by the roots. They get starved of cash. The economy booms. More of that money starts to go to, independent people and decentralization and us starting small businesses. And if we do that, we will win. And you're a vital part of it. How do we follow you? How do we support you? Where do we buy the book?
Thanks, Bryce. You can buy the book on Amazon. Right now we have ebook, we have paperback, we have hardcover. I think around April is when the audiobook comes out, so stay tuned for that. You can, if you just Google Woktopus, it's there. You can follow me on X, on Truth Social. I'm Tyler 2, the number 2, O'Neill, Oneil. I only have one L in my last name. There's a famous baseball player who used to play for the Cardinals. Now he's for the Orioles. He's also Tyler O'Neill. He picked up an extra L there. I don't know how he did it. But you can follow the Daily Signal on all platforms with the exception of TikTok. And of course, we're not on Red Note or whatever other Chinese Communist Party thing they're going to try to throw at us next.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, well, you can support our show by going to bryceeddy.com, signing up for our email list, and also hitting our new YouTube channel. We're building that after, they shut us down a few years ago. We're reestablishing our YouTube and putting the show there as well. You can follow us on Rumble, anywhere that podcasts are consumed. We are there. And certainly follow me on Super Bryce Eddy on Instagram, and Bryce Eddy 1 on X if you want to see me getting brain damage trying to argue with these woke nonsense people and getting them to come on my show and discuss their thoughts live, which they never do. To God be the glory, and we are out. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Thanks so much, Bryce.
Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.